My name's Tamara from the Cornish Seal Sanctuary, and I'm here to represent all of the seal rescue sites. There's 5 of us in total, so I'm just going to give you an overall summary of the work that's been done over the last year, but also over the last 10 years as well, just to give you an idea of how it's changed and the challenges that each of our sites faces. These are the 5 teams that run the seal rescue programme. We've got Hunstanton, Scarborough, Oban, ourselves down at Gweek in the UK, and then Blankenberg in Belgium as well. And collectively, nowadays we rescue around about 150 seals each and every year. Just to give you a few facts, not too many facts, I'm not really that good on stats, but to give you a few facts on the seal rescue programme. I think it's fair to say that seal rescue is Sea Life's most successful and certainly the longest running rescue programme. I think we worked out last year that Oban's been there around 35 years now and has been rescuing seals from the start. The sanctuary's been there since the 50s and joined Sea Life later on, but there's a huge amount of experience within those 5 sites. In the last 15 years alone, we've rescued over 2,000 seals collectively within the Sea Life group, which I think is pretty amazing stats. And the average survival rate is really important to us. Grey seals seem to cope very well with the rehab process. They're quite hardy, so we've got a really good survival rate of around 91%. Common seals have it a little bit tougher at 74%, but those stats still stand alongside other worldwide rehab centres, which we should be really proud of. We don't really like to talk about how much it costs us, but we work out it costs us around about £1,000 to I think around £5,000 to rescue one seal and take it through to the rehab process. So based on sort of an average figure sort of somewhere in between, Sea Life put in around about £450,000 a year into their seal rescue programme, which, considering we're a large company and there's other sites, charities that aren't able to stay open, I think that's a pretty impressive figure that the company is willing to put that amount of money into our seal rescue programme. There are a few differences between each of our sites and our rescue programmes, but one of the main differences is the species that we handle, and these are the 2 main species. The grey seal is born during the winter months, the common seal during the summer months, which means that our seal hospitals can be used throughout the year, taken in both species. And one of the main differences is that the grey seal is born with a white fluffy coat. So they're born on the beaches. They're very dependent on their mothers for about 2.5 to 3 weeks until they're completely weaned. And they shouldn't really be in the water. Occasionally they're seen in the water, but they're really dependent on their mothers. The common seal, on the other hand, can within a few hours of being born, can enter the water and can go and swim with its mother and get away from any threats. But it does mean when they're on the beaches, they're very, very vulnerable. The breeding beaches down in Cornwall are a lot more isolated and rocky, which is why we only seem to really get grey seals down in Gweek, whereas all the other sites cope with both species. And we have different challenges on how they're rescued and also on the reasons that they are rescued as well. But the first thing always starts with a pup on the beach and somebody spotting in it. It's usually a member of the public that spots a seal. They give us a call and they give us the details, and we'll send out either a member of the team or we'll send out some medics, British diver medics or volunteers to go and assess the animal on the beach. If it needs to come in, it comes back into our hospitals, and it can come in for various different reasons. We have lots of different reasons, and the sites see different reasons, but mainly the main problem is abandonment or separation at the early stage of the rehab season. It's pups that have been born and perhaps separated from their mums due to rough weather or public disturbance, unfortunately. Or it could be that the mother feels like there's something wrong with the pup and then just abandons it. The pup could be malnourished and dehydrated. If we've got a lot of rough seas, it tends to be that they don't get out and feed very well. So at that point, they need to come in just to be fed up. And then there's more serious things like respiratory infections, which I think Scarborough see more and more of. Things like pneumonia, we see lungworm regularly. Eye ulcers, which we get a lot of in Gweek. And then infected wounds like net entanglement. So that picture at the bottom, Rachel will be telling you a little bit more in a bit more detail later on, but that was a fishing net injury, which is one of the worst cases that we've seen, but she'll tell you more about that a little bit later on. And then we're getting more and more viruses spotted as well. I know on the east coast of England they're getting more herpes in their common seals. Influenza is quite a new thing that we're starting to see come in, or one that we're more aware of now. Sealpox, which is a bit like chickenpox in humans, and then PDV, porcine distemper virus as well, which seems to rear its head every 5 or 6 years. Once the pup comes into us, we have our vet come in and do a clinical assessment. The team are heavily involved in this as well, so we're checking the animal all over from head to flipper, making sure we note down any injuries and wounds. We're checking its temperature, making sure it's not got a fever or it's too cold, taking blood samples, and then the vet prescribes treatment, and then we begin the process of rehabbing, which is usually starting with fluid therapy, which you see in the bottom picture. That's actually milk, but what we'll usually do is give it 24 hours of rehydration fluid before we'll then introduce it, depending on its age, to either milk, fish soup, or straight onto whole fish. Once the animal's starting to feel a little bit better, it's perhaps finished its treatment, the wounds are starting to heal, it can then be put in water. And salt water is really the best thing for any wounds that are just a little bit niggly that we need to try and clear up. And then the competition begins. They have to start to fight for their fish. So we make it quite easy for them up in our seal hospitals. We either force feed them their fish or make sure they get their required amount of fish each and every feed. But then we start to make it a little bit more difficult. So they're starting to put on weight, so they can hold their own a little bit more. And they're then ready for the final stage, which the Sea Life rehab programs are probably makes our rehab program one of the most unique, and it's the fact that our pups go in with our resident adult animals. So in our pool, this is our pool at Gweek, we have 7 resident grey seals that are quite prepared to steal every single fish that goes into that pool. So all of these little guys on the picture have to be really quick, really on the ball to make sure they get their share, and we don't do them any favours at all. So the fish gets thrown into the middle of the pool, and it's up to these guys to make sure that they get their share of the fish. By this time, they're around about 20 to 30 kilos. We're looking for the commons to be up to about 30 kilos in weight, the grey seals up to almost 40 kilos before they're ready for release. But that's the next stage, and that whole process takes around about anything from a few weeks to 6 months, depending on how severe their injuries and illnesses are. But the aim is to get every single one back to the wild. So at this stage, they've been flipper tagged, and the flipper tag is a little plastic tag. There's no tracking device on it at all. It's literally a plastic tag with an ID number on, which gives us an idea not only who's who when they're in our pools. We can have up to about 30 pups in the pool at any one time, so we need to be able to ID them. But also gives us an idea once they've been released how they're doing back in the wild. But it does rely on people spotting those tags and giving us a bit of feedback. But these tags have an advantage in that they are allowing us to track our seals long term. So they should stay with them for life unless they get pulled out. But the type of scenario that we get is this, which is a beach full of grey seals. Lots of different shapes, sizes, spots and colours, and you can ID the seals from their markings alone. But the tags just help us out a little bit more. So you can see right in the middle of the picture, there's a little seal called Pacific, which was released, I think it was 2007. He's tagged on the rear left flipper, which tells us he's a male. So even if we can't see the number, we know that's an adult or a juvenile male grey seal. And we can see, if we zoom in close enough, we can just about see the number. But that gives us an idea of the year that he was rescued and released. So the colour changes every year with the changing seasons. So this year was green, the following year was yellow, and so on. So it gives us an idea of his age, but also gives us an idea of the age of the seals around it as well. So it gives us quite a lot of information. And from these tags, we've had seals that have been spotted not only in our local colonies, but also going across the Celtic fringes, which is Wales, Ireland, and down into France as well. And I think over on the East Coast, they've had similar success, seeing their seals go up and down the East Coast, and then over to the continent and back again. So the seals seem to follow regular patterns. From the post-release monitoring that we've been doing, and it's largely based on volunteers that allow us to do this, we've got over 1,000 animals on a database that we're getting regular feedback from. Just to give you one success story, this was a little pup called Hufflepuff. This was the year that we named all of our seals after Harry Potter characters. So she was rescued at 2 weeks old. She was found on one of the breeding beaches, completely exhausted. She'd been separated from her mum. So the British diver guys brought her up, got the cliff rescue out and brought her up the cliff, and we brought her into rehab. And she was quite an extraordinary, really. She went through the rehab process absolutely fine, no problem at all, and was released back to the wild. And the worry with rescuing whitecoats is that their survival rate's not going to be as good as weaned pups. But actually we're getting lots and lots of feedback about our whitecoats. This is Hufflepuff, a photograph of her taken about 3 weeks ago. And this is the first recording that we've got of one of our seals having given birth in one of our local colonies. Interestingly enough, though, that this is Hufflepuff, the larger seal. She wasn't ID'd by her flipper tag, she was ID'd by her coat markings. So this unique coat pattern that she's got on her neck was ID'd by our local volunteers, and they managed to trace her back to Hufflepuff, and we then saw her flipper tag. But she is now 7 or 8 years old, and she's got her first pup out on one of our local colonies, and that's what the seal rehab program's all about, is getting this sort of feedback. So what's changed over the last 10 years? Well, I had a chat to the other guys within the rehab program, and it was sort of a mixture of things. A lot of us are seeing almost double the numbers that we were seeing 10 years ago. And we've put this down to more unpredictable weather. There's a lot more cliff erosion now, which is destroying some of our colonies, where they'd usually feel quite safe in their little breeding coves. We've had cliff erosion, which meant some of the breeding caves have been blocked off, so the seals have had to move to perhaps less reliable breeding beaches. There's also a lot more access to the coastline as well for people walking around the coastline throughout the year, and also more development of our coastal areas. We've also had quite a few, I think it's 3 external rehab centres that have closed in the last 12 months. These are charity rehab centres, which has put more pressure on the sea life centres taking more seals. And for some centres they can cope with that and they can take on these extra numbers. For others they just can't, and they have to be turned away. The other concern that I think was a bit of a consensus was we're seeing more, or we're identifying more disease in our animals as well. And the risk, obviously, with our rehab programs, allowing our animals in with our residents, is that there's a risk of transmission of disease to our residents, which we've managed to cope really well with. We're not having any problems at all with that at the moment. So things like PDV, things like avian flu, they're all being tested for now, so there's no risk to our resident animals, but of course there's always an increased concern that there's something that we're not monitoring for, that we're not able to identify. There's also the risk to the staff as well, so we've started testing for avian flu in the last 2 years, and all the staff have had to have their flu injections and also be tested as well. Looking forward, post-release monitoring I think really is key to all of our sites. We need to know how our rehab programs are doing, and the only way we can do that is to find out how our seals are doing post-release. So looking at different ways that we can monitor our animals after they've been released back to the wild. I think there was a genuine concern about how we'll cope with the increased numbers. And also looking forward, looking at different ways to develop our teams as well. And I know something that Chris wanted me to talk about was the marine mammal rescue training, and possibly using our teams to rescue other marine mammals such as dolphins as well. But I think that's something that we need to sort of discuss perhaps at a later stage, perhaps in the workshops. But we've got lots of experience within our seal rescue teams that could be used for other marine mammals as well. That's it. Thank you very much.